I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are speaking to Dr. Frank L. Douglas. He is the author of a book called Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. It is a book that introduces and demonstrates the importance of three new concepts in addressing systemic discrimination. Dr. Douglas provides valuable insights and practical solutions for individuals and organizations seeking to create a more equitable and inclusive environment, drawing on his own unique perspective as a successful scientist and someone who has experienced discrimination firsthand. We're delighted to have the doctor on the spotlight today, and we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me here today.
My pleasure.
Let's start out with the big picture. Systemic discrimination, is that discrimination that exists within systems such as businesses, courts, and so on?
Well, the reason why I say systemic discrimination is basically for us to recognize that discrimination has been around for time immemorial. You know, the early wars, the religious wars, always a situation where a group that is in power has an ideology and feel that everyone else must basically share that ideology. Once you get to that point, and you have many followers, it gets into the system, and that's why systemic. And it's why I do not focus on racism, because discrimination occurs, be it ethnicity, be it gender, be it religion, etc.
Exactly. And I think that really makes your book inclusive. I mean, spend some time at family court and you'll realize that men are discriminated against, or
Yes.
pick your arena and you'll find out that in the corporate world, perhaps women are discriminated against. So we all do find ourselves held back or treated differently as the other from time to time. It transcends race, as you say. What are some of the common examples, would you say, of systemic discrimination?
Well, I think they often end up being in belief systems. For example, a belief that women or Blacks don't have the requisite training to hold certain positions. I remember when I was in college, the general feeling was that Blacks couldn't be quarterbacks. So you didn't find Black quarterbacks in the NFL. Now the last this year,
we had two Black quarterbacks facing each
Black
other.
quarterbacks.
Exactly. Yeah, changing those beliefs is a difficult task. How do we start changing mindsets and these opinions that people have that have been ingrained over decades, centuries, and millennia in some cases?
You know, I think there are two simple things: equity and inclusion. Asking ourselves the simple question, are we treating everyone? And when I talk about equity, I'm not just talking about equity for the person being discriminated, but in the organization, are we treating everyone fairly, equitably? And secondly, are they being included? Namely, are we behaving in a manner in which those individuals feel that they not only belong, but their contributions are being recognized, and indeed, they can really help the organization move forward?
Absolutely. Discrimination is also tough because it's hard to say when you are discriminated against. You don't know that you didn't get the job, or you weren't offered the position, or you were not admitted to the school because you're white or Black or yellow or whatever the case might be, because these people aren't going to tell you that, hey, you're too Black or you're too white or you're too Asian, right?
Well, that is true. There are many times when you're not aware that you have been discriminated against. But unfortunately, often it is very clear.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, as a matter of fact, which is what, in a real sense, led to the title of the book, Reframing, and the process that I use. After I completed my PhD, I was hired by Xerox, and for 3 months, I couldn't get a good project. Then one day, a white young man joined, and 1 week later, he was actually put on the hottest project we had in Xerox at the time, and he had not even completed his PhD.
Right.
I went to my boss to have the usual discussion, and I said to him, don't think about me as though I'm Frank. Think about me as though I'm Bob. And I was stunned to see the recognition come over his face, and he looked at me and he said, Bob has only been here a week, and I've put him on the artery project, which was the hottest project that we had. I was livid. I ran down to the office of the senior vice president to give him yet another example of where I was being discriminated.
Yeah.
Sometime later, I thought about that and recognized that I had missed something very important. That senior vice president had hired 3 young blacks that summer, 3 young black PhDs to join the 1 black PhD that Xerox had. So it was more important to him probably that Frank Douglas would be successful than it was to Frank Douglas, because he put himself on the line.
Right.
The second thing was my desired outcome, my desired objective was to get a good project. So had I gone to him and had I said, Dr. Tribus, could you help my boss find me a good project? I might have retired from Xerox.
Right.
So, sometimes it is right there. You see it, you face it. Other times you just sense it. And, what I've done in my lifetime is that when I see it and it is hitting me in the face, I address it. When I am just thinking that it might be the case, I just let it be.
Right. Exactly. Does a lot of it have to do with comfort level? Like, let's say I grew up like I did in a predominantly white suburb, went to Catholic schools that are predominantly white, and I get into the business world and I'm promoted to manager. I might feel more comfortable. I'm not excusing the behavior, but I'm just trying to explain it. I might feel more comfortable mentoring or promoting a white person because that's who I relate to. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? This comfort level and exposure to different people and different groups.
Yes. I mean, we tend to do that with which we're comfortable without having a malicious intent.
Yeah.
However, when we have a problem and we recognize we have a problem, then we have to consciously examine our behaviors and consciously do the things that would change that behavior, even though it is not malicious. I was asked, sorry, go ahead.
Sure, no, you go ahead. You were asked what, sir?
No, I was asked very recently, actually on another podcast, what do I think about the Supreme Court looking at affirmative action? And I said, it is such a big topic, but when faced with such a topic, I would hope the Supreme Court would go back to first principles, namely the Declaration of Independence, which said, all men are created equal, and they have inalienable rights, such as the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. When we have a situation where men who've been created equally have had that equality taken away from them, then we have no choice but to do the things which bring them back to a state where indeed they are included and they can really pursue life, liberty, and happiness. So it has to now be conscious, because there was a conscious effort to rob them of their status. There has to be a conscious effort to bring them back and give them the opportunities to enjoy what it means to be equal.
Now, some would argue that since we've had an African-American president, we now have an African-American vice president, that tilting the scale on one side or the other is no longer needed. What do you think about that, sir?
Well, if you're going to make the decision with respect to one person compared with millions who are suffering, that's a funny scale for me. I don't think if I were to take the millions of underrepresented individuals and put them in one scale and then take the president and the vice president and put them in the other scale, I don't think it will balance out. Yes, it means that we have moved forward and that we should recognize and celebrate. And that should also give us the courage to do more, because what it does say, that when that individual, such as President Barack Obama, is given the opportunity, he can perform. 2 terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did well. So there's not a question anymore, can a Black person be president?
Right. Exactly. And can a Black person win a Super Bowl as a quarterback? And many of these questions are getting addressed, as you mentioned, but a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of minorities, a lot of African Americans, a lot of marginalized people still live in poverty and still live facing discrimination every day. I would have to think part of the problem is, we talk about systems, whether it's courts or whether it's government or whether it's schools or whether it's the work place. These are individuals that run these systems. And if you're going to have a truly just justice system, it should make no difference if you're standing in front of, Brett Kavanaugh, or whether you're in front of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But it does make a difference because everybody brings their own set of values, their own frameworks, their own ideas to the table. So how do we address that? I mean, the Supreme Court itself, which you just mentioned, is so politicized, and it's a matter of, who's sitting on the bench that day, whether you're emancipated or discriminated against.
This is what I think is really the very sad thing for us here in America, because, I certainly would have thought, I came from Guyana at age 20. And America for me was the place where people were rational. They were passionate, but they were rational. They gave everyone an opportunity. They listened to everyone. And unfortunately, I discovered that was actually not quite the case. But one would hope that at the highest level, that politics would not be, that it would be principles. And regardless of what my particular belief system might be, the most important thing is the belief system of America, the concept of America. And everything should be judged based on those principles that we all accept. And we really need to get back to that. It is sad to me that we have to be talking about, this is a Republican-leaning court. This is a Democratic-leaning court. It should be the Supreme Court of America. Supreme, which means it's above all of those things. And it gets to principles.
Let's talk about some of your concepts for addressing systemic discrimination. You have 3 new concepts that you outlined in your book. Let's go by them one by one. What would be concept number 1, sir?
In fact, you mentioned the first one, individual. One of the things that I have noticed, and the DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion initiatives, have done a great job and continue to do in bringing awareness to the organization, about aspects of this discrimination and making them very aware. But at the end of the day, it's an individual who is suffering. And I don't think we pay enough attention to the individual. So that's one principle, that we focus on the individual. The second principle is focusing on equity and inclusion. And I don't spend a lot of time talking about diversity for the very simple reason diversity comes with individuals. It's an individual that brings the ethnicity. It's an individual that brings the gender. It's the individual that brings the cultural orientation, etc. Diversity is good for metrics and counting, but then we lose the individual. So I focus on the two things to me that are important. Equity, which the leaders have to set. They have to set the frame of fairness throughout the organization for all. And then inclusion, that has to be the behaviors that are fostered by the supervisor and co-workers that are inclusive, that recognize each other's contributions, and that is really focused on making sure everyone is engaged to move the organization forward. So I focus only on equity and inclusion and the resulting individual engagement or individual motivation. So that's the second concept. The third one is, okay, when we have a problem, how do we reframe it? The example I gave to you when I was at Xerox, a reframe is simply, instead of going to Dr. Tribus and complaining about being discriminated against, had I gone to him and said, please help my boss find me a good project. Two things. One, that was in his sphere of influence, and he would have been able to do that easily. And secondly, it was the desired outcome. It was what I would have liked. So just reframing the problem. So the third concept is reframing the problem, finding a better problem to solve that gets us to the outcome that we would like. So those are the three concepts which I introduced in the book.
Absolutely, and very strong and effective concepts if put to use properly. Do you think we need to adopt more of a mindset espoused by Dr. Martin Luther King, which was to have a colorblind society where we're judged by the content of our character rather than the color of our skin, of course, but also on these federal forms we fill out, state forms, they all want to know what race we are, which can be a problematic question to answer nowadays. We have so many mixed-raced people. Right? I mean,
yes.
How do is Barack Obama black? Yes. Is Barack Obama white? Yes. I mean, is Kamala Harris Indian? Yes. So do you think it'd be a good idea to eliminate that and get that out of our faces constantly? These
No, absolutely. Yeah, some things are necessary. For example, the diversity, I think, was necessary to have the discussion. But we are human beings, we learn, okay? And we therefore, based on what we have learned, we need to advance and change. And I think Martin Luther's concept of being judged by the content of the character, it is time that we judge by the content of the character, and let's forget about the color. Let's look at the content of the character. Let's look at the contribution the person can bring to the table. Let us look at the goals that we have and how that individual can help to move those goals forward for the organization, for the society, etc.
There's a new twist to the discrimination framework, and that's the idea of gender. I mean, in academic circles, the idea of gender fluidity has been discussed for quite a while, but now it's in the mainstream. What is a woman? What is a man? You're not really a woman. You're not really a man. How do we address something like that some people perceive as such a threat to the nuclear family, for example, and to their religious upbringings?
Well, here is the reframe. Okay, the reframe has to be not, is the person a man or is the person a woman? The reframe has to be, what is the concept of the family? Mm-hmm. If we focus on that reframe and make it inclusive and make sure that we're treating every one of God's children equally, then we'll have less of a problem of feeling threatened, because we have reframed it by focusing on what now is the concept of the family.
Exactly. And I think you've touched upon my next question, which is the Safe Haven Dialogues reframing process. Tell us a little bit about that, how it works, how it can be used to address systemic discrimination.
Well, what we do is we have a panel of individuals whom I call our VIP, victors in overcoming injustice in their professions. So they're individuals who have faced discrimination, have dealt with it. So we have this panel. If an individual is aggrieved, they can come to us. And the first thing which we do is the intake form, in which we have them describe very briefly, 1-2 sentences, bullet form. What's your desired outcome? What is the problem? Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Okay. What's the environment like? And state the problem. Bullet form to start moving away a bit from the emotion of it. Then we look at that description and we examine it from a viewpoint of equity. What are the issues there? With respect, are there privileged groups? What's the prospect for the individual? Is that clear? Can the individual discuss, are there processes where if they have a problem, they can present it without fear of retribution? And then from an area of inclusion. And from inclusion, we actually look at the microaggressions. People may not be able to describe whether they're included, but they can tell you when they feel excluded.
Right.
So we look at it from the microaggressions, micro-insults, micro-invalidation, etc. And once we've looked at those, then we actually have a matrix of equity versus inclusion that actually specifies 4 types of cultures. For example, if equity is high, inclusion is high, you're in a psychologically safe culture. If they're both low, you're in a psychologically toxic culture. Place the individual in that culture and then look at the desired outcome, find out which quadrant they're in, and then ask yourself a question. Is it better to look on the equity side or on the inclusion side to find a better problem to solve to get them to the desired outcome? And so that then is a discussion that the panel and the aggrieved individual engaged in to find a better problem to solve, to get the desired outcome, and then to reframe.
Reframing seems to be the key. Addressing how you look at the problem and adjusting that frame to what we see and what best suits the individual, the system that's involved, and trying to come to a good resolution for both.
You have summarized it excellently. And in fact, one of the things that we point out is a better problem to solve. For example, we have some criteria, but one of them is that the solution to that problem benefits not only the individual, but also others in the work unit.
Absolutely.
It becomes easier for the supervisor to engage in that dialogue, safe haven dialogues, to engage in that dialogue than the very threatening, difficult dialogue that I'm being discriminated against. What are you going to do about it?
Exactly. Once it becomes like this big HR thing, people shut down. They're going to be very clandestine in their activities and actions. And you'll still have the discrimination. They'll just be a little more cagey about it.
That's right. It goes on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But you still feel it.
Yeah, exactly. The sting is just as real.
Yes.
What do you see as the major challenges in addressing systemic discrimination?
Everything begins with willingness. One of the reasons I also focus on individual engagement is my trying to understand what is it that drives people to action. And when we're looking at organizations, the thing that drives them to action is not so much the social the social issue as the productivity. And Gallup has demonstrated that companies that are in the 4th quartile with respect to employee engagement have 25% greater productivity than those who are in the bottom quartile. So if you focus on employee engagement or motivation, you cannot get that in an environment that is toxic or psychologically unsafe. So equity and inclusion have got to be aligned. And so my feeling is the way best to approach this is, okay, there are the social responsibilities that we have, but the one goal we do have when we are in organizations is the productivity of that organization and the well-being of that organization, as well as the well-being of the employees, the individuals in that organization.
Yeah.
If they're not being treated equitably, if they're not included, well-being is low, employee motivation, engagement is low, productivity is low. And so that is what I am suggesting. There is the social imperative, but there's also the business, the organizational imperative. And some people will be motivated by the social imperative, and many people will be motivated by the business imperative.
Yeah. It's such a complex issue when you think about it, Doctor, and comes to addressing it, because discrimination is so often invisible, but the effects are keenly felt. You don't know if you're not getting a good table at the restaurant because of something about you. You don't know if you're not getting the promotion because something about you. And a lot of it, like you said, doesn't necessarily serve the benefit of the organization, but the hostess of the restaurant might not care, or the admissions officer of the university might not care. And so it's very much an arduous task in changing the mindsets of people. And I say something about you because you could be too tall, too thin, too fat, too pretty, too ugly, walking funny, bad accent, skin color. I mean, the levels of discrimination are amazing and profound. Do you agree?
No, I absolutely agree. In fact, as I have looked at it and looked at myself as a young person growing up and facing discrimination and throughout my career, the one thing that has helped me has actually been the serenity prayer. Namely, God give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, with courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly.
And I think that is what we have to do, is that wisdom part. Is that something I can change, or is that something I should simply accept? And perhaps it's something I accept for today, but tomorrow I'll be able to deal with it. So it takes the rage down. You begin to understand what things should I be enraged about and what things should I simply, say, it's unfortunate.
Right. Just part of life,
Yeah.
Like I tell my kids, not everybody's going to like you. For whatever reason, not everybody's going to like you. It might be too tall, might be too short. It's funny, as an actor, I'm 6'6", and people say to me all the time, do you lose roles because you're so tall? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe they're not telling me if I am, you know what I mean? Or maybe I'm getting some roles because I'm so tall, because I look authoritative. You have to play the cards that you're dealt. That's what it comes down to, I guess,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. We have to play the cards that we dealt, and we have to be sure that, one, the organizations that we are, and we should seek organizations. Okay. We should not seek out organizations where we know that they do not want 6'6" tall individuals. They actually want dwarfs.
Exactly.
We shouldn't seek to get
Find where you fit in. Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's one of the mantras of being an actor, is know your type. Know what you look like, know what you are, how people will cast you. And basically that's what you're saying, know where you'll fit in.
Yes.
Yeah.
If now you know that you fit there,
right,
and you're being denied inclusion, now you have a basis for the discussion and trying to understand why. But don't take on every battle where you feel there might be discrimination.
Exactly. Let's talk about a big issue, particularly with the African American population, and particularly the male African American population, and that's mass incarceration. People are treated differently in court. I'm also a journalist, so I'm in court a lot, and I see how people are treated. And the famous instance is that crack cocaine charges are much more strict than cocaine charges. So a drug that's prevalent in the white community is treated one way. A drug that's prevalent in the Black community is treated another way. And so it just, I don't want to make this seem like an impossible mess to get out of. But what do you think about mass incarceration, and how do we remedy that? And when we look at bail reform and things like that, they seem to be championed by some, resisted by others. What's your take on this whole problem within the justice system when it comes to crime?
Yeah. Well, I think you have touched on it, the discrimination, where one community is given severe sentences, sometimes just even for possessing a small amount of marijuana, end up getting a lifetime imprisonment.
Yeah.
I think the movement to reverse the sentences and bring out of prison individuals who have got these crimes, quote unquote, that are really not dangerous crimes and who were treated unfairly, is a first move in that direction. But I do think that the justice system needs to take a very hard look at itself and need to reform those things, because also a lot of it sometimes depends on an individual judge.
Right.
And that again is also, not fair.
Or the ability to hire a high-priced lawyer.
Or if you have a high-priced lawyer,
yeah,
and the setting of bail, etc. Poor people are incarcerated because they can't make bail. Okay, right. And we have more of our men incarcerated than are in college. Okay, so when you face those things, we have no choice but to really do the reforms, and the reforms have got to be done on a system basis, because they're affecting the systems, and they're affecting the lives of communities. And one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that when we put Black men in jail for minimal crimes, think of the impact on the family.
Yeah. And you're impacting their lives for the rest of their lives. Yeah.
We've incarcerated that family.
Yeah, and that man who's been incarcerated will never be the same after spending 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years behind bars. Absolutely. It's changed him as a person as well.
It's changed him as a person. It has changed his possibilities as a person, because the society looks at him differently. His opportunities are changed. He's also lost a lot of time, because in the meanwhile, even if it's just technology, things have moved forward. So he has a lot of catching up to do. I mean, he has literally, lost time,
right,
which sometimes cannot be recovered that easily.
Exactly. And his mental wellness and so forth is impacted. So talk about Antifa and BLM. Are these useful movements? Are they just an expression of the frustration? What are your thoughts?
I think that any movement that brings to our attention the unfairness of what is happening is an important movement. First statement. Any movement, however, regardless of how good and just their cause is, that resorts to violence, in my book, is not a movement to be supported. Period.
Agreed. Okay. Agreed. Across the board.
Across the board.
Yeah. Whether it's the IRA, whether it's BLM, whether it's the Proud Boys, whatever it is.
Across the board. Yeah. I may not agree with with your cause. I may not agree. I may agree. But what I will disagree with, whether I agree with your cause or not, is the use of violence to make your point.
What do you see as the hope for the future?
You know, my hope for the future, strange enough, lies in the young people. The reason for that is, you know, my kids, they went to predominantly white schools. They have white friends, they're friends. They've remained friends. You know, that I now have grandkids, and you know, their kids interact with each
Right.
other. So that whole issue about which you talked about earlier, about familiarity and
Mhm.
being that is changing because they have grown up together. They know each other in a very normal way. And so that's one of the hopes I have. The second thing that we need to be reminded is that John Lewis, when he was being beaten up, was only 19 years of age.
Mhm.
Martin Luther King, when he gave this famous speech in Washington, was 26 years of age. In fact, he was assassinated at 39. Okay.
Yeah.
My question often is, where are the young people today, the MLKs and the John Lewises, etc., where are they? Though we need them that had this vision and this passion, to have us be our better selves. So my hope is the young people. The whole social media, of course, it has its dark side, but it also has the good side. I mean, I just looked at how quickly the students in Tennessee were able to summon each other. It's all through social media and go and demonstrate.
Yeah.
So the social media also will lend itself to some of the changes, that we need. But what we do need are those inspired, young, multicultural, multi-ethnic groups to come together and to challenge the things that will make us our better selves.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had a similar experience to you. Like I said, I grew up in almost a predominantly or exclusively white community. But for my children, it's been much, much different. Their best friends are Black. I mean, that's like a cliche. Their best friends are Black, but they are, and they're good friends. My wife is Chinese, an immigrant to this country. So things have changed through almost a natural evolution, where things were very, very segregated, like divided often by railroad tracks in many
Yes.
communities.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Or highways or whatever it is. But people have come now to both sides of the tracks and have met. And that is a very, very hopeful thing. The exposure. My stepchildren are Chinese, I see, so it's become a different world than the world I grew up in, being born in 1962. It is very hopeful. And I think this polarization we see are the last rally cries of people trying to hold on to a world that will inevitably slip away from them.
One thing that we do miss, and did you tell me that your wife is Chinese, and I hope you speak Chinese? Learning,
I
no,
try.
it's important. Learning the other language is very important. When I became global head of research and development and on the board of management for Aventis, now Sanofi, I was headquartered in Frankfurt. And when I arrived there, the first day I introduced myself, and about 20 individuals got upset something I didn't understand and walked out. When I learned what they said, I said instinctively, I was just told that your colleagues said that they're sick and tired of people who can't even speak their language coming to tell them how to do science. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start learning German. I probably won't succeed, but you will see me trying. And the deal is you're going to have to do your science differently because you have not put drugs on the market over a long period of time. I have. You haven't. Okay. I started learning German. And much to everybody's surprise, but more so to myself, I became literally fluent in about 6 months. Now,
wow.
I was, a lot of opposition I had. 9 months into it, I made a presentation, 3,000 individuals, and did it all in German. And things began to change. And I was told 3 years later, I was sitting with the team, and one of them asked me, do you know when things change for you? And I said, no. And they cited that episode. And they said, well, people said, if this man, as busy as he is, honored us and honored our culture by learning our language, then we know he's not the ugly American who's telling us how to come and do things American way. We need to listen to him. And he said that was when things changed for you.
Wonderful. That's a great turning point. When in Rome, speak Italian. That's the
Speak
moral of
Italian.
the story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The name of the book is Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. It is a book that is helpful and hopeful as we evolve into a better nation and a better world, and more importantly, better individuals. This book will give you the tools that you need to help your school, your company, your organization behave and react and respect people with much more equity. Dr. Douglas, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a delight speaking with you, sir.
A real pleasure speaking with you, sir. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.